Welcome back to the Cineposium podcast. I'm Martin Ibarra-Ramos. Thank you for joining us for this second episode of Season 3 of our show. To quickly remind you all how the show works, each week we invite members or collaborators of Cineposium to curate a film for remote viewing. Then we have a conversation about the film. New episodes will be published every Thursday, and this week's curator is Cineposium's very own Mike Mazzacane. And we're also welcoming first-time guest to the show and new member of Cineposium, Samantha Texan. Without further ado...
There is a predator on the streets of Gotham City. A predator who's dropping criminals like flies. And the Batman is set up to take the fall.
What do you want?
To find out who's iced the old gang.
It's Batman!
The Joker holds all the cards, but he's not exactly playing with a full deck.
Can't be too careful with all those weirdos around.
When the lines between good and evil begin to blur, Gotham turns against him.
Batman, this is the police. You are under arrest. Stay in the light.
What do you mean you won't? You have to go after him!
He didn't do it. The Batman does not kill.
Next Friday, the Dark Knight stands alone.
You think you know everything about me, don't you?
This madness ends now.
You just don't know when to quit.
Cartoon Network presents a special Batman movie, Mask of the Phantasm, next Friday at 4. Only.
Batman Mask of the Phantasm wasn't supposed to be like this. It wasn't supposed to be a theatrical animated film. What started out as a 4x3 direct-to-video feature was changed to a widescreen theatrical feature midstream, resulting in an anemic Christmas 1993 box office run. Through it all, though, Mask of the Phantasm has endured to become a cult object. Phantasm isn't like other Bat features that came before or after it, obvious differences in medium aside. In the quartet of live-action Bat films that were released between 1989 and 1997, directors Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher probed the Batman side of the ledger more often than not. Phantasm places its emphasis on the man under the cowl by examining the cost and temptation of the inherent fascism within the cape and cowl through the emotional life of Bruce Wayne, not the other way around. By interrogating the man underneath the cowl, Mask of the Phantasm is able to tell a quintessential Batman story. Surprisingly, perhaps controversially, its closest spiritual sibling is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, wherein an older, cynical Bruce Wayne's personal failings cast a dark shadow over his symbol as he deals with the presence of the Man of Steel. In a stark contrast to other Bat media, pay attention to how powerless this Batman is, perpetually reacting to the plot machinations of the titular Phantasm, an angel of death who is running Gotham's criminal element through with their hooked scythe. The detective is always on the back foot, trying to clear his name and figure out what this newcomer really wants, and that's before the Joker gets involved. With Batman displaced, the film explores the tragic quality of Bruce Wayne and his promise, not as a means to show traumatic events and yet another Wayne murder, but to finally represent the burden he feels, eternally looking for supernatural validation from his parents. A twist of fate encounter with Andrea Beaumont, however, throws that entire order into disarray as he begins to question not just if he could be Batman, but should he be, eventually prostrating himself before his parents, asking for emancipation from his promise, in Kevin Conroy's best work as the character.
It doesn't mean I don't care anymore. I don't want to let you down, honest, but it just doesn't hurt so bad anymore. You can understand that, can't you? Look, I can give money to the city, they can hire more cops, let someone else take the risk, but it's different now. Please, I need it to be different now. I know I made a promise, but I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy.
For the first time in a Batman film, it earns its dramatic angst and makes the core relationship of the film actually effective. Previous Bat-ships are one-sided affairs. Vicky Vale and Dr. Chase Meridian both look at Bruce Wayne and Batman with a pathological interest. Bruce Wayne looking right back with all the empty charm of a leading Hollywood man. The actors and writing lacking the chemistry to make these couplings nothing more than the rote compulsory heterosexuality you come to expect from Hollywood blockbusters. Phantasm shows audiences why Bruce and Andrea would work together. Representing the why creates for the film what former Batman writer Tom King describes as love and joy that combines with the tragedy of his past into something new, which the producers used to illustrate and verbalize the why of Batman, mirroring him with the wraith-like and wrathful Phantasm in an effective mirroring that none of the other live-action films have managed to create. Mask of the Phantasm is, as Siddhant Adalakaha says, Batman laid bare, stripped down and forced to reckon with his own darkness and potential, like Alfred's reaction when he first sees the cape and cowl. All in 77 minutes, the shortest of any theatrical Bat feature currently made. Start with Samantha. What did you think of this movie? Because you said this was like your first time seeing it. Correct.
So it was my first time actually seeing it, but I'd grown up and watched the show my almost entire life, and it was really good. I think I agree with, I know Roger Ebert and them got to review it, and they're like, we regret not seeing it in the theater, and I regret not seeing it in the theater, because watching it, it feels like an episode that was just like a longer episode on the computer, but in a theater it probably you'd feel the ambiance of fellow Batman fans and everything. That's like, oh, this feels like a film. So it's really good. I just felt so bad that it wasn't in the context of the theater, so I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, it's a really good long episode. And I like that it really did analyze for, I want to say, a nicer view of Batman versus what we kind of get later, like in the video games, everything else where he's just angry at some point, and never really analyzes him as like, okay, well, he's going to be, kind of balanced and not as angry, analyze where it comes from, and interacting with someone else who had also lost their parents, talking to them from the grave. So he doesn't seem as, I'm just so angsty all the time, insert Batman voice here. It was, okay, it's slowly developing how, and the poor guy's never ends up happy, even if it's something minimal, like never getting the girl.
Yeah, like in that review of the home release for the movie, Siskel and Ebert were like, it actually tells a story. And like this kind of like stabbing charm of just like, yeah, most of the Batman movies, they don't really, well, no, some of them, they tell stories, but like this is just, it runs like clockwork. Martin, how about you? You finally get to see this movie after listening to me yammer on about it forever.
Yes, this was also my first time with the film, and I to agree with Samantha, this is also my sort of return to this whole sort of aesthetic. I was a fan of the animated series, although I don't know how much of it I really remember. To be honest, I do remember watching it a lot, and I remember certain characters. So, like, if this was indeed like the Phantasm's introduction to the world or not, I wouldn't have known. I don't really remember. What I'll say is, first and foremost, I really enjoy just being back in this whole like world, the animation style, the voice actors that we get. I also really appreciated, actually, one thing in particular was the sound design and that of the voice of the Phantasm, which I think, to again agree with Samantha, actually the theatrical experience of that I think would have been really interesting, because it wasn't really expecting it, and I pay attention to those kinds of things and really enjoyed it. And also the music really stood out to me too. I thought across, I was just really felt back in the world and really enjoyed, if we can call it a score, the score throughout the film. So it was interesting that I wasn't really sure what to expect with this, and that attention to Batman Bruce Wayne's origin felt familiar, but I think this very much stands on its own. It felt different than the same sort of scenes, the chronology of scenes that we usually get in a lot of Batman origin stories. This felt like a particular moment within that timeline, and I really appreciated that. And as you say, kind of spending time with Bruce Wayne, and as well as the kind of shared trauma that he has with Andrea, and what goes on within that relationship. I really enjoyed it, and I was surprised by how this felt like something very familiar but very different for me from what I've seen before. So I'll leave it at that for now.
I kind of wanted to like unpack the Andrea of it all, because like I wrote a longer version of the note, but I made this little aside that the next great Batship is with Chris O'Donnell's Dick Grayson, actually, and like it's kind of like it's somewhat tongue in cheek, but also like I'm incredibly serious because that's like Batman's next great relationship in the films, and how women in Batman movies just that's a terrible role. Like it's all one-sided, not quite damseling, but like they are objects to be saved than characters to want and desire their own things. Like even like Anne Hathaway's Selena Kyle gets like that way in the end a little bit. And it just like I did this whole Batman rewatch a couple of years ago, and like the thing that just kept reinforcing for me was just like how lacking in chemistry whatever Bruce Wayne and whatever big major Hollywood actress they brought onto this movie just they had. And it's just like, oh, because like I was watching Batman Forever a couple weeks ago actually, and I texted Alex, the co-host of this podcast, and was like, there's no hetero explanation for Val Kilmer's Batman in that movie. And it's so like it's Joel Schumacher making the movie, so I'm pretty sure he was like, yeah, there isn't. But it's just like in these movies, it's just like they force this just compulsory heterosexual relationship into these movies. And I'm just like, maybe if you took it out, it would be better. And in this one, like they do the basic stuff. Here's why they work together as a couple and why they'd want to spend time with each other, which is my biggest critique whenever I love rom-coms and romance movies. And most of the time I'm just like, but why are these people together besides them being pretty?
Yeah, agreed. I think it's something kind of to what I was trying to express when I just gave my sort of reaction. Is there are things that feel familiar, certainly, in terms of like the kind of attraction that's kind of built immediately within Bruce Wayne and his counterpart, and but to your point, I think the character work is what stands out. The fact that we understand this character's motivations, and again to go back to the point I made earlier, that sort of shared trauma, I think, and we understand both of their positions, we understand both of their motivations. I think that's kind of like, it feels like kind of like a bare minimum, and in this way it certainly paid off, because I agree with you, I don't think it's quite paid off as much before, although it feels like something that's it seems maybe like expected to be done in this sort of narrative. But I totally appreciated this connection here, because I do think it paid off, and certainly when we get to talk about the ending, we'll kind of unpack why it works. But yeah, I do think that that it pays off in the end for sure.
Yeah, to kind of go off that point, like I'm so used to reading the comics and playing the games as well, so I'm like Selena Kyle Batman, but they're able to develop that more. So to your point, Mike, of looking at cinematically all of them, they really don't ever develop the female. So to see Andrea / Andy, we get to see her motivations, we get to see kind of what she wants. She has conversations that don't involve, kind of in the Bechdel test, she has conversations that don't necessarily involve a guy all the time. I mean, most of them do, but at least it's not in the context of getting a romance. It's, things for her father, her family, and again, her own motivations, rather than I'm here just to hook up with Bruce. And it's very interesting how quickly, unlike some other Bat characters, or honestly at this point a lot of people do, where they notice, hey, you're Batman, that quick. She just knew. And that tells you how close she is, and how, I want to say, even smart she is, because in the comics, it's always someone who it took them a while, or they've had to known Bruce really well and you had to have trusted them. So that shows you how quickly in one film they established one female character finally as being an equal to Bruce and able to pick up on both lives and not judge him for him, not have the moment of you need to be just Batman or you need to be just Bruce. Very much is like you could do both in the context of some of the stuff in her life as well. So she's very well-rounded versus stuck.
And like they do all that in about 5 minutes, from probably about minute 15 to minute 22, pretty much. Like as you get their meet cute 3 days later, and then you're basically, because of flashback narrative, you go to the World's Fair, and it's like it's all that in like 5 minutes of screen time. It's like the thing that I keep returning to with this movie is it just runs like clockwork. And that's basically because the 4 writers on the movie, Alan Burnett, Paul Dini, Martin Pasca, who passed away last year actually, and Michael Reeves, not related to Matt Reeves. Basically, they just cut the movie into 15-minute chunks and divided it by 4, and like, okay, you get that section, you get that section, you get that section, and they're like, there, we write it and we put it together, and it's perfect. It just all like this movie does a lot of plainly good basics filmmaking, like just mirror, like, okay, so like obviously Batman and the Phantasm are mirrored against each other because that's how that sort of duality is generally associated. But then they just give Bruce and Andy different like variations on the same line. And so when it like we just jump to the end real quick? It's like when he gets to the end where he's just like, but what will vengeance bring? And she's just like, they took everything from me, and like it's not even crazy, but you should get that. I'm just like, yes, it all feels earned. And yeah, it's just like this movie does so much like just basic good storytelling well that
yeah, I have to agree. And I didn't I thought that the sort of back and forth between past and present also felt really seamless. I picked up on it right away and never really felt lost. And I do agree also that the film does kind of move real quickly, but in that I felt pretty engrossed, and I felt like I certainly could be sort of taking my time with it and kind of becoming invested in it all, because I think because it was so introspective and because we get these character moments rather than, I mean, there's a decent amount of action in it, I'll say, which maybe were the moments where I don't want to say that I didn't enjoy as much per se, but just that I wasn't maybe particularly as invested in. It was those character moments in particular that I was really interested in, those more quieter moments and introspective moments. And I think all of that really enabled it to pay off in a way that made the shorter length of it, although I could have spent a longer time with it, I think it felt really refreshing and worked really well for me.
Yeah, it was so interesting that, again, unlike every other Batman media, like I'll even say the comics, and again, I'll go back to the video game, so the Arkham series, it's all about fighting Batman, but never really having a moment of, hey, Batman, how are you holding up? What's your point of view? And it's really, also interesting because in the other mediums, they do the revenge angle, but they make him like the angry revenge person. I'm like, that's not the Batman I knew from the animated series as much. And you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, he actually has a moment, his own introspection with that whole line of, the basically like, to Bruce, but how he does it is much different than Andrea, where she's, again, Batman doesn't kill. And that's a scene I love where Gordon runs out and he just says, Batman doesn't kill, so it can't be him. And it's like that's Batman. He takes vengeance to a degree. He's not willing to kill anyone. And they kind of have that discussion where it's like, Andrea, you're on the bad path of what I could have been. So it's interesting to have those character moments versus, okay, we're going to have that for, a couple minutes, extend length of like, let's say a cool fight scene. But then what you really want from a superhero, especially like Batman, who, unlike the other DC, to bring in the other DC universe people, they're like gods. They're non-human that have to get human attributes. He's a human who just happens to be really smart. So we need more. He should be able to have more character moments where we're not like, oh well, he's just gonna do it because he's Batman. He's just gonna solve it because he's Batman. So it's nice to go, here's him as a person, and we're so used to seeing the newer ones of he's a more angrier, more revengeful guy. It's like, no, here's where it comes from. And again, like under Bruce Timm's hand and everything, it's so much nicer to see that he's just not pure vengeance fuel, blinded by anything. He's like, no, this is why I do it, without having to very blatantly say it. And again, kind of going to the how they tell the story, basic story elements really well. They do a lot of showing and not telling. So there's the scene where, you know, you figure out, oh, that guy who was a gangster in the gang, that was the Joker, the Joker. And they don't turn around and go, did you know, guys? They, you know, show that picture. Batman kind of draws a face, and then you go, oh, but there's nothing else. He doesn't go, it is the Joker, audience. So they do a lot of really good stuff that some people don't do nowadays. Like we have that all explained to us in this chunk of dialogue or whatever. But back then, and for an animated feature to which people look down on anime feature and comics, you know, they just did it so simply. Like you looked at the picture, you looked at that's the Joker. Oh, that guy was also a killer for the gangsters. This guy's, if you didn't somehow know that already, he's deadly. And he has connections with Andy and Andrea and, you know, Bruce's life before. So these are cool story elements they did so well without having to, you know, info dump.
Yeah. The animated series is the only Batman like film TV property where I'm like, oh, that one doesn't actually kill, just because like all the other live action versions except for that one and Batman 66 Adam West, they all kill. They're all murderers. Like it's just the only, like I had this long rant about how it's only through the like mollifying logic of action movies that were allowed to be like, oh no, those people, they're not dead because we didn't see the bodies. But like, no, he, like, if you look at the movies, he's murdered lots of people. It's only when Zack Snyder goes, no guys, he's fucking murdering these people and it's bad because clearly look at how I'm framing it, that people are like, someone lose their mind. And yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to also quickly chime in and say that something else I appreciated with the narrative work here is that, you know, we've been talking about how it really gets into character here rather than some of the more obvious tropes. And one thing for me that stood out is it isn't quite like the end of the world narrative, you know what I mean? Where like, you know, or like just the complete end of Gotham or something, you know, where like in things like that. I'm kind of blanking on what happens in each film, but you know, in this it feels more grounded. It's about themes like, you know, debts and paying off debts and investments, and yes, there's also the shared trauma and the revenge element. And you know, we also, to get into back, I guess, to the point I was making before about Batman and Bruce Wayne's origin, it felt new, I think, in a way to me, because one thing that I really liked is he's trying to establish that like fear element. I really liked that moment in which he learns like, okay, I can fight these guys, but I'm not really scaring them. And I really liked that introspective moment there where he's like sort of growing into who he needs to become as a part of that bigger thing of, you know, do I want a family life or do I want to be the vigilante that I'll become? I liked that element tossed in. So I think, yeah, there's to double down on the fact that I really liked how grounded the narrative was.
And yet they still blow up the World's Fair in a massive, beautiful explosion. Right. And so like, yeah, there are spectacle stakes here, but like really it's a fight over, is Andrea's soul forfeit or not? Mm-hmm. And turns out maybe it is. Spoiler alert.
You gotta have those comic book moments. It's always kind of in there. I think to point out, the people who made the anime series are clearly they were students of the old Batman into the new one. I've seen many documentaries kind of talking about certain parts of this era where they look at this and it's, you know, you're going from the campier and the original versions of the comics as well as made by Kane and Bill Finger, if you've ever seen Batman and Bill, to know who actually made Batman. But it was campy, but there was sort of this darkness, and then we get into kind of the 90s or a little bit the 80s with the comics as well, diving into Batman going into the darkness, but not going too revengeful. And then you have the animated series. I was like, okay, we can balance this, come back. And again, as students of, I want to say, the older Batmans, they didn't heavily rely really on old, established Batman villains. And I kind of wanted to say that point because we've seen the newer movies and every other media for Batman now. How many times have you seen the Joker? Mm-hmm. How many times have you seen Poison Ivy, not Iceman, all the Batman villains? But this movie made its own. So the Phantasm isn't a villain already inherently, or at least even well known in the comics. I completely made up. They even made a Harley Quinn. They're the ones who made Harley Quinn now really popular. So they're smart and they know how to do, I don't want to even use the word bad guy of the week, but kind of in a sense. But they were always did a good job of how do we flesh out that character so that Batman can not only beat them, but how will it work out with how you beat them, rather than, all right, cool, Batman's gonna win, he just punches him, wins. It's no, there's always, again, introspection. So it's really cool to see that this is one of the first, actually, I want to say, out of the films I can think of that even came out now, a film that made a completely original villain. The Joker, so Mikey posted the trailer. He's in the trailer, but he's not there for half of that film. And he doesn't come into the end as the surprise, but he's not the main character. It's still Batman and Andrea. So that's really cool that, again, being students of the comics and seeing everything go out, it's so interesting just to see that this is what they came up with. A really good, solid film that can stand on its own without you going, I need to go see Batman's parents get murdered in front of me again. And I need to know who all these villains are. You don't need any context. They give it to you without it being too much. And that's so good about this film.
Yeah, totally agreed.
Andrea Beaumont will be making her DC mainline universe debut actually in Batman Catwoman #1 by Tom King and Clayman, which comes out in December, actually. She's been around for 20, 25 years now, basically. And she's only just now showing up in the mainstream comics, which is kind of absurd because there's so many people I'm going to write my fanfic of Ben Affleck Batman fighting the Phantasm. It'll be perfect. I'm just oh, buddy. The last thing I kind of wanted to get to just was how much the scene where he basically he's begging at the gravestone of his parents, and that scene is just this wonderfully dark moment where he's just I didn't expect to ever be happy. And that's the thing in all the other Batman movies that we never get, is this idea that he's happy. In Burton Batman, he's mentally deranged. In Forever, he has no idea who he is. In Robin, he's also, once again, just kind of I'm a dad now. I don't know how to deal with partnerships. This is new to me. In Begins, in the Nolan trilogy, he's just always just on vengeance. And then in Batman v Superman, he's just oh, I'm consumed by xenophobic fever and rage, so definitely not happy. And just in this one, they're oh, we get to see Bruce Wayne be happy for about 5 minutes because we get to see why he would want to be with Andrea. When you look at the character of Rachel Dawes in the first 2 Dark Knight trilogy films, there were okay, to their credit, in Begins, they do develop the kid relationship, why he would be attracted to her because of that to a degree, but she's not really her own character. And that just gets even more pushed to the front in the Dark Knight. But outside of her, it doesn't really work, and he's never happy. And in this one, he's allowed to be happy 3 times, and each time it just gets ripped away from him, and you're oh, that's why you're still Batman.
That was the point I was going to make. So I totally agree. It felt like this for me. It felt like a really refreshing and relieving moment to have this like period with Bruce Wayne where he's just genuinely happy and like and we understand why he shares this connection with this person. And so to the point you were just talking about, I was going to bring up as well that that although we do get that backstory, we don't get much time with that character otherwise. No, there's no real introspection. There's just really not enough writing for that character to understand fully who they are. And the same goes for, I think, in Rises at the end when, Bruce Wayne and Selena Kyle are, kind of off on their own and like with these new identities, I assume, or whatever. But, the same goes with that character. We don't really get that character fleshed out very much to the point where we really understand their connection or understand the degree of happiness that Bruce shares with her and in that relationship, or what their life looks like now. It's really just, I don't know, it's kind of like open to interpretation, I guess, but to a degree that I almost don't care in a way, which is kind of sad for me to say, but if I'm being truthful, I guess that's how I feel.
Like the live action Batman films, the 89 to 97 cycle at least, and well, okay, afterwards, but like they're all you're supposed to understand them on the level of star power. And like, why is Batman with Selena Kyle at the end of Rises? Oh, because it's Anne Hathaway and Christian Bale. That's why. And in this one, it's Kevin Conroy, who we don't see, but we hear his voice. And it's Dana Delaney, because she plays Lois Lane in the Superman animated series, who like two fairly obscure voice actors, like much love to Kevin Conroy and Dana Delaney, but like they're not exactly mainstream icons the way Christian Bale, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, any of the Batmans are, or like anywhere near like peak early 90s Nicole Kidman was in Forever. Like I'm just kind of hung up on like, why did Nicole Kidman take that role? She just looks so confused in this movie, like, what movie am I in? I'm in a serious role. I'm a serious actress, and then this whole movie's going on around her.
Yeah, there was so much of like that star power thing in the other films that it's glad like when it's an anime piece, yeah, you don't see them. And then also this is before we do that whole celebrity voice actor thing. So imagine if that was the case now, it would have been like, oh my gosh, Batman is played by blah, 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 blah. And I think that kind of happened with the Lego Batman movie a little bit, which is when I just remembered it's maybe probably a happy Batman piece. But again, to their credit, it's like, oh, here's people that you don't see their faces. They're carrying this film. Some people apparently I've read some reviews, they're like, oh, the only good one was Mark Hamill's Joker. I'm like, he is the Joker. That is the Joker voice everyone hears. There's no way you don't hear it. But it's like, you don't unhear Kevin Conroy as Batman. He is forever Batman. And he does a really good job of, putting the shrill in his voice and he's like, why can't I ever be happy? And again, we see him happy, and it's so rare. And anywhere from comics to even the newer animated series, kind of the post that era where it's coming out like straight on DC and stuff, which incredibly more violent stuff. Like Batman's never happy there either. And he has a bunch of his kids around him. So it's like, wow, you're never happy. Here's you being happy and losing it, not because of anything that's your fault. Also, I want to bring up, because in the other films, it's something somehow related to him. Oh no, your enemy killed your girlfriend. Oh no, this. It's like, oh, that's actually all kind of, I don't want to say her fault, but she chose vengeance, and she was like, okay, bye. And it wasn't a sense of anything that's your fault, Batman. Feel bad, be in sorrow forever. It's like, no, he got to be happy. It was just unfortunately taken from, just like his parents, without it having to be a death also. Unlike the people really love the Christopher Nolan pieces, but I feel like he has a habit of killing off the females. So it's like, oh, here's tragedy, another death. So it doesn't have to be a death for it to be sad for Batman. And that also gives complexity, which I love, versus intense sadness, intense anger all the time. So I love that he did that, and I really love that, this piece is an entire love letter to Batman. Developing, again, a character out of nowhere, making, in a sense, like the Joker does appear, but he's not the main star. Batman gets all these layers, and you kind of wish, why don't modern pieces still do that? They don't need the star power, and they don't need to rely again on the old stock characters. Like, oh, we all know the Joker, so we expect this, or we all see Catwoman. We need to see her with Batman. That doesn't need to happen. So I wish more modern films for Batman go back to this. Judging by some of the more recent posts for like the Robert Pattinson one coming out, I think it's going to go the Batman Catwoman kind of route, and again with star power. So I'm hoping that's not what happens anymore. Let's go be a student of the old Batman. Maybe that's where they need to go.
Yo, the dialogue for Mark Hamill's Joker, the double entendres and the punning is great. Paisan into my Casa Nostra s you Casa Nostra. It just so many good little puns. It's delightful. So is there anything that you guys wanted to talk about, or
why is there no Nightwing movie? Dick Grayson, best son, best boy, arguably also randomly promoted to have the best ass.
It's Tim Drake and I will fight you.
Well, okay, fine. I'll accept that. I'll accept that. But also, don't know why they always promote Nightwing booty everywhere. I appreciate it, but it's just there. So yeah, where is it? Where's my Nightwing movie?
Gail Simone, and she knows how to rule the internet. So, like, I just realized, like, this is the first animated film we've brought to Cineposium. And, hey, we chose a good one. So, yeah. But it just, like, this movie shouldn't... I should not be bringing this up in a UCLA... Well, like, no, I would be doing that because I'm a superhero guy. But, like, really, this movie shouldn't have endured the way it did. It bombed... It bombed at the box office. It grossed like $6.8 million on a budget of $5 million in 1993 money, so it did not make money. But, like, everything about this movie's production and the fact that it is an animated movie and we exist in an environment where animation is looked down upon wrongly, it should not have endured the way where everyone goes, oh yeah, that was like they put out an animated Batman movie in the theaters. It would have been a fun trivia point that like annoying nerds would bring up at cons. And instead it endured to become this like, no, you guys, like this is the best Batman movie. And like it has a legitimate like stake and place in the discourse without it being this like cult object that is held at arm's length because like, oh, it is an animated movie that's only 77 minutes long. Like this is a movie that like does more filmmaking in those 77 minutes than arguably Joel Schumacher did in Batman Forever and Robin, which are two movies that he didn't really have that much control of, admittedly. But like it's one of those things where like this movie like could have become a little thrown to the dustbin of history, and instead it's this movie that's just endured when nothing about it was supposed to be this way.
I hadn't realized that this is actually the first animated film that we're presenting here on Cineposium. So actually, thank you for bringing that up, and I think it's a great one to start with, and I hope we can make that a bit of more of a pattern, because I do have a love for animated films as well, particularly when it comes to sound design. So, of course, I had to bring up that one point I made about the Phantasm's vocal sound design that I think was really, really neat and kind of gets into another area that I love, which is like kind of horror elements. And I thought all of that design around Phantasm worked really, really nicely. And so all that's to say, I hope we do get back to some more animation in the future. Perhaps I'm going to have to come up with some ideas of my own. But I think that about wraps up the episode. So thank you, Mike, for this presentation. And Samantha, thank you for coming on to join in on the conversation. I'm sure you'll be back soon.
I hope with more animated features as well. So thanks so much, Mike.
All right, thank you.
Next time I'm going to bring Dragon Ball Super Brawly the movie.
Yes.
Do it.
I cried. That's comics and anime for you. The new Cineposium.
To be continued on Cineposium Anime.
Nerdposium.
Nerdposium, I like that. So we hope you all enjoyed the conversation, and we hope you'll continue to join us in our third season of virtual programming. We do have some exciting plans for this season, so please do come on back and subscribe to the show on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Cineposium and on Twitter at Cposium to keep up with our updates and to keep in communication with us. So thank you all again for listening, and until next week, take care, everyone.
Bruce Wayne, support us.